A confession that silenced Hollywood. Before Shirley Temple died, she said something that shocked everyone in Hollywood. People saw me as a sweet little angel, but the reality is, I lost my innocence when I was only 3 years old. This wasn't a joke. It was a final truth from a woman who was once seen as America's only hope during its hardest times. The little girl with beautiful curls and a smile that could save a failing studio had kept a painful secret for over 50 years. The same movies that made America love her were also the places where her childhood was taken away. The happy scenes people saw on screen hid a much darker reality behind the camera. Behind the laughter, Shirley went through things no 3-year-old should ever experience. What made America's most perfect child live her whole life feeling ashamed? Why was the time everyone celebrated also the time she described as beautiful on the outside, but painful underneath? It all started in 1931, when 3-year-old Shirley Temple entered a life more powerful than anyone expected. Chapter 1. How Hollywood Stole Her Childhood. To be honest, my childhood stopped when I was 3 years old, the day they put my name on a Hollywood contract. Nobody in Los Angeles in 1931 could have guessed that a 3-year-old girl, so small she needed a wooden box to see herself in the mirror, would become the icon who saved a studio from going bankrupt. But nobody knew that in that same year, Shirley Temple, who would later be loved worldwide as America's little angel, had started down a road she would later call giving up my childhood so adults could survive. Gertrude Temple, Shirley's mother, wasn't a cruel woman. She was just a mother living through the Great Depression, a time when every family fought to raise their children, when so many people were out of work that the future felt impossible to even imagine. When Gertrude took Shirley to Meglin's dance school in Los Angeles, she told the neighbors she just wanted her daughter to have fun. But the second she walked through those doors, the moment she saw posters of children who got picked for movies, the moment she heard other mothers talking about money, Gertrude's dream of letting her child enjoy herself quickly changed into a chance to improve our lives. For Shirley, Meglin's dance school wasn't a fun place to play. It was where Gertrude put all the family's hopes onto her daughter's tiny feet. She brought Shirley there not to learn dance as an art, but to get ready for her first contract, just like many Hollywood mothers whispered about back then. And strangely, just a few weeks later, that chance came, but in a way no child should have experienced. At a small performance in Santa Monica, director Charles Lamont, who was known for finding talented young children, saw a 3-year-old girl with natural curls dancing to music. There was no forcing, no obvious pressure from her mother. Shirley danced like she was meant to be on stage. Lamont walked up to Gertrude after the show and offered a contract. Gertrude said yes almost right away. She didn't know, or didn't want to know, what was waiting for her daughter behind those studio doors. The first studio that hired Shirley was Educational Pictures. Despite its innocent-sounding name, it made the Baby Burlesks series, films that were later criticized as one of the most troubling examples of using young children in early Hollywood. In these films, Shirley and other children wore small versions of adult costumes. They were put into roles they couldn't possibly understand. Tiny dancers stepping onto a stage on shaky feet, or little diplomats talking playfully with political characters. What adults thought was funny was actually a sign of how little the industry back then understood what was appropriate for young children. Some children of color were giving roles showing outdated stereotypes, reflecting the racial attitudes of 1930s Hollywood. These scenes are now seen as unacceptable, though audiences at the time thought they were harmless fun. But what happened backstage was harder than what was in the scripts. Behind one set of sound stages on Hollywood Boulevard, the director kept a small, dark room. Inside was nothing except a big block of ice. It wasn't part of the set, not a movie prop. It was used for punishment. Any child who didn't listen, whether they cried because they were tired, got scared of the lights, or accidentally looked away from the camera, was put in that room. The metal door closed. The child's crying disappeared into the darkness. While outside, adults kept talking about scripts, camera angles, and money. Shirley later wrote in her book Child Star that she was sent there so many times she couldn't count them. A 3-year-old put in a cold room pressed against a block of ice to learn what happens when you don't cooperate. Nobody asked if she was scared. Nobody asked if she was cold. Nobody asked if she wanted to go home. And nobody noticed that while she was locked inside, Shirley would turn her face to the wall and wonder what she did wrong. That question stayed with her into old age. These experiences marked her so deeply that as a woman in her 50s, Shirley admitted she understood physical embarrassment even before she could read. But the hard parts of Shirley's childhood didn't end with the Baby Burlesks filming. It was just the start of a series of experiences the industry would try to hide for many years. As Shirley got a little older, around 6 or 7, her fame grew. Studios saw her as a lifeline during the Depression. One smile from her could sell millions of tickets, accidentally making her the easiest target in an industry where power belonged to those behind the scenes. At age 12, Shirley was taken to MGM's office to meet producer Arthur Freed, one of the most powerful people in the industry at that time. In interviews many years later, Shirley remembered an encounter she said she didn't know how to explain with a child's understanding. She thought he was joking to impress her. She laughed, thinking it was comedy. Moments later, that laugh got her rushed out of the office like she had done something wrong. At 17, during a meeting in Hollywood Hills, Shirley faced another situation that left her frozen in fear. If an adult hadn't walked into the room at the right time, her life could have taken a much darker path. Shirley never gave the details, but she said that moment made her realize her whole childhood had been built on a foundation she never controlled. These experiences happened repeatedly over the years, quietly hidden by the shiny glamour that covered up the weight placed on a young performer. Looking back, Shirley never blamed one specific person. She called it a result of the time, an era when young performers had no say, when studios had more power than families, and when parents, whether they knew it or not, let their children be pulled into a system that couldn't be stopped. And everything started in 1931, when Shirley was handed over to Hollywood by the people who loved her most.
Chapter 2: The Golden Cage of Fame. I grew up in front of hundreds of cameras, but nobody ever asked if I wanted to stand there. Shirley Temple once said a line that surprised many readers of her book. "I don't remember when I learned to dance. I only remember dancing so the adults could feel relieved." That sentence isn't the complaint of an old woman, but the plain truth of a childhood millions once thought was filled with happiness. To understand why Shirley said this, you have to go back to her earliest days, when natural talent became the golden key to profits for those who should have protected her. Shirley Jane Temple was born in April 1928 at Santa Monica Hospital. Even in the delivery room, the nurse said, "This baby has unusually bright eyes." But nobody expected that brightness to become the lifeline for her family, and then for a whole struggling studio. From just a few months old, Shirley amazed adults. At 6 months, she copied her father's whistle perfectly. At 2, she stood on a chair, saying the Pledge of Allegiance backward without making a mistake. At 2.5, she tap danced with a skill many adults needed months to learn. This kind of talent couldn't be hidden, and Gertrude Temple, usually careful with every part of raising a child, became surprisingly bold when she saw it. One afternoon in 1931, right after Shirley turned 3, Gertrude casually told a neighbor, "This little one will buy us a house someday." The words were said lightly, but fate seemed to take them seriously. Just weeks later, Gertrude brought Shirley to Meglin's dance school. Most children there danced in school shows, but for Shirley, Gertrude didn't say, "We're here for fun." She said, "Don't disappoint me," a sentence a 3-year-old couldn't understand, but could feel deeply. In that wooden room, smelling of chalk and sweat from dozens of worried mothers, Shirley's talent became the engine driving the Temple family's hopes. And that engine was quickly pushed into a cycle that never stopped. When Shirley was invited to Baby Burlesks, Gertrude didn't hesitate. The fear of poverty during the Depression made her believe her daughter had a golden opportunity. But even she didn't see, or couldn't let herself see, that the opportunity was a trap stealing the child's early years. Shirley's days vanished into a tough schedule from early morning until late afternoon. At 3 years old, she arrived before the sun came up and left when the janitors were cleaning up. During filming, she was pushed into roles she couldn't understand. She only remembered the adults laughing, laughing loudly, laughing with joy, but nobody explained why. As an adult, Shirley remembered that all I recall is that people laughed at my body, a sentence that sent chills through Hollywood when her book came out. But that was just the beginning. During the golden years from 1934 to 1939, when Shirley was only 6 to 11 years old, her work schedule was something even adults would have found hard to handle. She had to be at the studio by 7 in the morning and could only leave after 8 at night. Her only break lasted less than an hour, and during the year she filmed 3 to 4 movies, finishing more than 40 films before she even turned 12. No adult actor had a schedule as demanding as that. But Shirley had no choice. Her smile was what kept Fox Studios alive during the economic crisis. And because of that, the smile had to show up no matter how much she was hurting. In the famous tap dance scene in The Little Colonel, Shirley had to practice over and over on a staircase at faster and faster speeds. Her small feet hit the cold wooden steps until her toenails came loose and bled. When Gertrude saw it, she simply asked, "Can you still dance?" The studio wouldn't let the scene stop, and Shirley, trained like a reflex, nodded. In 1936, when she got a bad ear infection that needed surgery, the studio gave her only 1 day to rest. The next morning, they sent a car straight to her house to bring her back to the set. Nobody in the family protested, not because they were unkind, but because they were afraid of something even worse: losing the contract, losing income, losing the fragile future they had just built. But the physical strain didn't just come from filming. It also came from what America loved most about Shirley, her signature curls. 56 curls. That number was mentioned in every article praising her. But behind it was a quiet struggle that happened each night in her small bedroom. To keep them perfect, her mother used hot water mixed with vinegar and wrapped each curl around metal rods that burned her scalp. Her eyes stung. Her skin got irritated, and sometimes she couldn't sleep because her head hurt all through the night. Shirley later remembered with gentle sadness, "I was a puppet, and the strings were the dreams of adults." And she was right. Forces controlled every movement, every smile, every step she took. Forces she could never touch. Adult expectations, studio profits, and her family's fear of poverty. But the cycle couldn't last forever. Hollywood never stays loyal to a child who starts to grow. And that brutal truth was waiting for Shirley at the next turn of her life. A turn she didn't see until the stage lights started going out one by one.
Chapter 3. When Hollywood Turns Its Back. And then when I started getting taller, everything fell apart so quickly I didn't understand what was happening. That sentence marked the start of the darker chapter of Shirley Temple's life, a chapter the world saw but never truly understood. Shirley Temple once said something that shocked the public. They used to say I was the future of Hollywood until the day I grew a few inches, and that future vanished. No words can describe how harshly Hollywood treats children who grow in the wrong way. An industry that once saw her as its brightest treasure suddenly turned away just because her body followed the natural course of life. Starting in 1940, when Shirley turned 12, her career fell with shocking speed. The child who had ruled the box office for years, who made Americans stand in line outside theaters just to see her smile, was now met with lack of interest. Audiences didn't want to see a maturing Shirley. They couldn't accept that the little angel had become a young girl. To the public, Shirley Temple had to stay forever the curly-haired child singing on the good ship Lollipop, nothing more. Any change was seen as betrayal. And Hollywood, coldly practical, understood that perfectly. So the moment Shirley no longer fit the old image, she was pushed aside. The teenage films studios made for her, like Since You Went Away and The Bachelor and the Bobby Soxer, couldn't save her fading image. Audiences didn't want a growing Shirley.
They wanted the 6-year-old who could warm their coldest days with a smile. But time doesn't go backward. As studios realized this reality, they started taking Shirley off their lists. Scripts written for her became fewer. Phone calls from producers became rare. And in just a few years, the brightest star of the 1930s was considered too old at age 15. As her career fell apart, Shirley looked for an escape in her personal life. In 1945, at Hollywood Methodist Church, in front of hundreds of guests and reporters, she married young actor John Agar. Many believed the marriage would help her rebuild her image and future. But what happened was the opposite. John Agar was young, handsome, and rising, but had many problems: jealousy, nights of parties, and a lifestyle filled with chaos. Shirley, barely past her teenage years, entered a marriage she wasn't mature enough to handle. She lived with anxiety, arguments, unfaithfulness, and long nights of silence. 4 years later, in 1949, they divorced, a decision that shocked the public, but for Shirley was a needed release. Just as she was recovering emotionally, the biggest hit struck her career. A Kiss for Corliss came out in 1949 and failed terribly. Theaters were empty, critics dismissed it, and Shirley's already weak reputation collapsed completely. In 1950, at age 22, Shirley Temple announced her retirement. The decision wasn't rebellion. It was the most honest confession of her life. I didn't want to be an adult forced to act like a child. Hollywood didn't just abandon Shirley when she grew up. It left her with something worse, a sense of emptiness she didn't know how to fill. And when she reached for her last source of security, the money she had worked for since she was 3, Shirley discovered a truth crueler than the industry itself. When she opened her trust account in 1950, she expected enough money to build a peaceful life, study, or start over. But instead of the millions that were legally supposed to be saved, Shirley found $44,000. Her entire fortune of $3 million, equal to more than $50 million today, had disappeared as if it never existed. And the person responsible for its disappearance was her own father. George Temple, the man who once took his daughter to the studio, stood behind the camera watching her perform, fixed her ribbon before each scene, was the very person who emptied every dollar from her trust fund. He spent the money on luxury cars, hired help, risky investments, and a lifestyle the family would never have touched if it weren't for Shirley. When the truth came out, Shirley didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't blame. She simply sat in silence. A lifetime of work since she was still in diapers, becoming the golden goose both the studio and her family depended on. All of it vanished with a single bank statement. People asked Shirley why she didn't take her father to court, why she didn't seek justice, and her answer left everyone speechless. Family is more important than money, and I was too tired to hold any anger. Those words weren't sweet. They were the painful acceptance of someone who had grown up far too early, who understood that some wounds can't be healed through anger. She chose forgiveness not because her father was innocent, but because she needed to move forward. And just when it seemed her life had hit its lowest point, Shirley met the man she would later call the only peaceful part of my life. A new life was about to begin, a life without Hollywood's blinding lights, but one that finally gave Shirley something she had never truly had: a real home.
Chapter 4. Rebirth. Finding Peace Beyond the Spotlight. Shirley Temple once confessed a haunting truth. I only found peace when no one called me Shirley Temple anymore. Perhaps that's why she saw her second life, the one after Hollywood, as her true rebirth. And that rebirth started in 1950 at a warm gathering in Hawaii where Shirley met the man who changed everything, Charles Alden Black. Charles was unlike any man who had ever come into her life. He didn't ask for an autograph,
didn't bring up movies, and didn't even know that the woman standing in front of him had once been the most famous star of the 1930s. He saw only Shirley, simple, intelligent, with eyes that held experience but still kept a quiet warmth. And it was that ordinary humanity, something Shirley had never been given, that made her feel seen as a real person for the first time after years trapped in the role of a little angel. Soon after, they married. No flashing lights, no reporters crowding the doors like her first wedding. Only honesty and a promise of peace. That promise stayed strong for more than 55 years until Charles died in 2005. People said they were rarely apart for more than a few days, and that Shirley called Charles the only peaceful part of my life, a sentence that summed up everything she had lacked since childhood. But Shirley's life didn't end with love. After leaving Hollywood, she stepped onto a much bigger stage, the international political arena. In 1969, President Richard Nixon heard Shirley speak about the Namibia issue during a small meeting and immediately saw that behind her childhood image was a sharp and surprisingly capable mind. Just months later, he appointed her as a U.S. representative to the United Nations. Hollywood had made Shirley an icon. Politics made her a voice. She didn't sit in diplomatic rooms because of her fame. She walked into them on her own merit, through knowledge and discipline that many analysts later described as unbreakable determination. In 1974, Shirley became the first woman in U.S. history to serve as ambassador, assigned to Ghana. With professionalism and honesty, she built lasting diplomatic ties and helped change the way several African nations viewed the United States. The peak of her political career came in 1989 when she was appointed U.S. ambassador to Czechoslovakia, just as the nation was exploding in the Velvet Revolution. She watched a 41-year regime fall in a matter of weeks. She met Václav Havel, who soon became president, and supported him in the early days of rebuilding diplomatic relations with the United States. In the memories of European diplomats, Shirley Temple Black wasn't a former child star. She was a brave, sharp, and deeply insightful woman who understood both the weakness and the strength of freedom. Not everyone gets praise from Henry Kissinger, but Shirley did. She was smarter, more disciplined, and sharper than many professional diplomats I've known. A statement that not only confirmed her abilities, but also redeemed a childhood the world had reduced to a girl who danced and smiled, nothing more. But while her political career reached new heights, Shirley faced the most difficult battle of her life: breast cancer. In 1972, when doctors told her she needed surgery, Shirley refused to hide it, as most women did at the time. After the operation, she held a press conference right in the hospital, her arms still bandaged, and told reporters that women needed to talk openly about their health to save their own lives. It became one of the most important public health moments of that time. She was called a leader in breast cancer awareness, and millions of women started getting regular screenings because of her courage. In her later years, Shirley lived in Woodside, California, a quiet town with tree-lined streets. She gardened, cooked, wrote in her journals, and sometimes shared stories with friends about the countries she had visited and the leaders she had met. Nobody mentioned her childhood roles, because to them, Shirley Temple Black was someone completely different. A fighter who had lived 3 lives, a child exploited, a star adored, and a diplomat respected. On February 10, 2014, Shirley Temple died at age 85 from chronic lung disease. And only after her death was a small secret revealed. Shirley had been a long-time smoker, a habit she had hidden carefully to protect the image of the perfect child star. Nobody blamed her. After a life filled with so much pain beneath the surface, who could deny her the right to keep one quiet corner for herself? Shirley Temple's life, stretching from Hollywood sets to international summits, from bright lights to peaceful sunsets in Woodside, wasn't the story of a lucky star gifted with fame. It was the story of a girl who lost her childhood, of a young woman who grew up too soon, of an adult who learned to rise from ruin, and of a diplomat who finally discovered her true worth. From the curls loved by the world to the hidden pain behind the scenes. From the films that brought joy to America to the silent nights filled with hurt. From Hollywood's glow to diplomatic meeting rooms, and finally to the quiet garden in Woodside. Shirley never stopped moving forward. She showed a simple but powerful truth. Glory may fade, but courage never disappears. Today, when we look back on her life, we don't just see a child legend. We see a strong woman, a quiet fighter, and a heart strong enough to forgive, rebuild, and create a completely new life on her own terms. If Shirley Temple's story touched your heart, consider leaving a like to support our production team. And if you want to explore more secrets, untold truths, and hidden corners of Hollywood's greatest legends, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we bring you a new story, the kind you won't find anywhere else. See you in the next video. Thank you for staying with us until the end of Shirley Temple's journey.